Join Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, on a journey into creativity and transformation. Each episode, Marc and his guests explore the intersection of science and spirituality to uncover ways to live a more inspired life. Together, we'll navigate both the seen and unseen realms to spark joy and personal growth. This is a community where you are empowered to discover the diamond within. Marc is an award-winning psychic medium, decorated veteran, and teacher based in Seattle. Using his intuitive gifts, he guides the curious on profound soul adventures. Now, here is your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector.
And hello, friends. You are both the inspiration and the inspired. So let's embrace this journey together, inspire others, and let's make every moment count before we expire. Welcome to Inspired Living, where each moment presents a chance to ignite your passion, explore your curiosities, and embrace the many wonders of both the extraordinary and, yes, the ordinary, the paranormal, which becomes normal, and science fiction that eventually becomes science fact. I'm your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, thrilled to guide you on what I like to call another soul adventure filled with creation, inspiration, motivation, and most importantly, discovering for the human experience and life's journey. Together through this show, we'll uncover the unique diamonds within each of us while revealing the many wonderful hidden gems waiting to shine in our lives and around the world. Whether you're at home, at work, or on the road, or anywhere life takes you, Inspired Living is crafted to uplift and recharge your spirit and to empower your dreams. Inspired Living is all about building a supportive community where we celebrate every victory, big or small. And each episode features incredible guests like the one we have today, who have faced challenges, loss, failure, defeat, but have persevered and pursued their passions, their goals, and motivations, making positive impacts in their respective fields and making our world a much better place. You can expect engaging discussions, perspectives, thought-provoking questions, and actionable steps to transform and manifest inspiration into your own reality. I always like to say people are portals, and today's going to be a fun show. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our inspired listeners around the globe. Your support through listening, downloading, leaving reviews has made Inspired Living podcast now a top choice for inspiration, introspection, and spirituality. So thank you. We are truly humbled and grateful for each and every one of you that tune into the Om Times television show and wherever you get your favorite podcast from. If you haven't subscribed, liked, or followed us yet, there's still time to do so through the social media platforms. You can connect with us over on our Facebook group page called Inspired Living. You can also follow us on Instagram, Blue Sky, and X, also known as formerly as Twitter. Just look for the handle Inspired for us. That's the number 4, Inspired for us. Or you can also check us out on YouTube, where we go under Inspired Living, and we're also streaming through Audible and through Alexa and wherever, again, you enjoy to listen to your favorite podcasts from. So let's get ready to be inspired, uplifted, and motivated, because the best is always yet to come. So let's go prospecting together through what I like to say, body, mind, and spirit. And we hope you enjoy today's show. I want to start off with a quote because I think it's very relevant for today's topic. We're going to be bringing in Dr. Scott-Mumby with his new book that we're going to get into more details, New God, New World. But before we do that, I want to read a little bit about him. And I also want to open up with a quote from Albert Einstein, somebody that I have followed and admired and read and done a lot of research on. And Albert Einstein says this, and I think it's very important when it comes to topics like today's show. Quote, "Science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind," end quote. And I think that's very, very important for the conversation that we're going to be having with Dr. Scott-Mumby, who is a British-trained holistic physician. He's also an ordained minister, and he's also a best-selling author with over 50 years of clinical experience. So he's been doing this for some time. He's internationally recognized as a medical pioneer, and he was one of the founders of the modern food allergy movement and was dubbed the world's, quote, #1 allergy detective, end quote, by the Sunday Mail. He's now based in the United States, and Dr. Scott-Mumby has authored numerous books on health, self-care, and spiritual growth, combining science, psychology and consciousness research, which I think is very, very important. That's why I opened up the show with that quote from Einstein, because you got to have, even Carl Sagan talked about, you got to have spirituality and science that work together, not oppose one another. His work challenges outdated belief systems and invites more intelligent, compassionate, and life-affirming understanding of both health and the divine. And Scott says this, quote, changing the conversation around God, time for a new look, divinity without fear, judgment, or control for a world ready to evolve, end quote. If you want to learn more about today's special guest who's joining us for the very first time, you can go to newgodnewworld.com. And with that, let's bring our special guest in, Dr. Keith Scott-Mumby, with his new book, New God, New World, which is an exploration. Yeah, plug that book, show it on the video, now that we're streaming through Om Times Television. And, just reimagining the divine for people who think deeply like myself, feel honestly and live in the real world. Welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about how this book came to be and what you're all about with your 50 years of experience.
Right. Thank you, Mark. Wonderful to talk with you. You're a great guy. This got started. I mean, I know you've heard of channeling, and I'm not sure I believe in channeling, but it is true that one day I just got the impassioned desire to write this book. And my excuse as an MD is not an excuse is the wrong word, but I thought as an MD, you're supposed to heal things and fix things. If there's something that needs fixing right now more than anything else in the world, it's the current religious view of God. It's more divisive and troublesome than ever it's supposed to help. So I thought, well, I think I'm justified in tackling it as a healing. So this is meant to be a healing book. It's not a religious book. It's not denominational. It isn't Christian. It isn't anti-Christian. It's just starting from a different place and seeing where we end up with a different kind of God. And what would that mean? Listen, it's time for an update. The God that we've been living with is like over 2,000 years out of date, and nobody's updated it. This figure was put together by men living in a desert, warrior types. But I mean, what did they know? They didn't have cell phones, computers, cars, rocket ships. They knew nothing of our world, and yet their view is imposed on us, and it's stuck. So don't you think it's time we had a change? Let's take a different look at what God might be if he's not some towering old busybody in the sky that clearly suffers with issues like anger management. He's a misogynist, that's for sure. And it seems to be more stuck on punishment and revenge and those kind of things than on loving kindness, to be honest. I mean, I'm going to say some things that will hit a bit below the belt to some people, but those that can't ask the question are not going to enjoy the book, and they're not going to be interested in what I have to say. So who cares?
That's right. That's why we have you on the show, because it's all about perspectives. I always say people are portals, and we've covered many topics over the many seasons of Inspired Living. And so, let's hit below the belt. That's okay. Because I've learned in this world that you're going to, some people love it and other people will hate it. And that's just the world that we live in. But, as we start off the show, one of the things with my own personal experiences with what we try to define as God or what God is, it's always sat kind of awkwardly with me that, especially with the teachings, we can't even get our history right from let alone 2,000 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. So I'm always kind of a student of history, and I'm like, well, our history isn't really accurate. But, it's always kind of stuck with me, Keith, that, we have in the writings, we have a perfect God that created us in his image, but then yet would, judge us for being imperfect beings. So that's from a
Mark Twain said that, he said a God that makes people imperfect, that knows they're going to fail and then punishes them for failing. Yeah. I mean, what kind of God is that?
Right. And logically, it's never squared with me, right? It's never squared, and that's it's always sat with me about, why be created in his perfect image and then be judged for not being perfect, because nobody's perfect. We all are here to learn, right? And that's the school of life. But tell us about, the book has this relevant tone without being religious. And there is a difference between religion. People listening to the show may have no idea that there's a big difference between a religious and spiritual concept. And, tell us about, what was a deliberate balance within the book, if you want to plug the book again so people can see it, And
Yeah.
the title of it, New God, New World, but also
I
that
think we
bottom
can
part.
take it as a given, can't we? If we change the God, we're going to change the world. I think that's a given.
But
well, of course, the problem is, how do you define religion? How do you define spirituality? What's the difference? But in a nutshell, the way I'd sum it up, Mark, is that religion is something, it's a vertical. God said this, and the Pope and the priests all said this, and we're told what to think and we're told what to do. Spirituality is a discovery from within, as you know, and nobody can tell you what to think or what your experience is going to be. And I don't think anyone has the right to interpret it for you. You have your experience and make the best of it you can. And if you're smart, you make wonderful things of it. If you want to be dogmatic and troubled with guilt and other issues, then you can go that route as well if you want. But I think there's a clear cleavage between what religion has been doing to us and what I think is healthier, a better way of thinking and living.
And in the book, you talk about new God, and some may be seeing this or hearing this and be like, "What do you mean by new God?"
What do you mean by that? Yeah, no, that's a good. Why don't we clear that up to start with? What do I mean by a new God? Well, it's starting out from a different place. You see, the existing God is kind of an out there and came around and put us down here. Now, I start from a different place, and I call it primal consciousness. This is my question. What if consciousness came first? Now, scientists, of course, say, well, that's impossible. You have to have a brain to be conscious, which is absolutely not true. Or maybe a computer, or maybe a robot, but you really need a brain to be conscious. It's psychopathological science, Mark. There's no evidence of any kind to support this. It is just an opinion that you have to have a brain to be conscious. Well, if consciousness came first, that wouldn't be true, would it? And think what follows is this is before matter, energy, space, and time. So consciousness has no time, for example. So no beginning, no end. That means it's not going to go away anytime soon. It's there forever. And one of the jokey questions when I'm doing a talk on this is, where have you been for the last few billion years? What have you been doing? Because you can't vanish. You're here, you're signed on. But anyway, so that gives us a different model. It means that we all started out from this place I call primal consciousness. Clearly, and I've got no scientific proofs or work on this, but clearly you can deduce that consciousness is capable of splitting, because we are still all one. We are still connected. I believe in that model, but somehow we've managed to individuate and separate off. So there's now billions of us, probably quadrillions of us throughout the universe. And the source was this primal consciousness, whether you want to call it God or something else. I don't think it's important what we call it, but it's there above and behind us all, and it's infinitely wise. If it did come first, then this primal consciousness would know everything. And it's been one of my precepts all through my teaching life that I believe we know everything. Absolutely, at source, we know everything, but we have to selectively unknow things in order to function. If we knew absolutely everything, we'd be bored to death in 10 minutes. You think, well, I've done everything, I know everything, I know what's going to happen for everything that I do, so I'm kind of bored. How long is it going to? I've got another 500 billion years to go, but I'm already bored after 10 minutes. So that wouldn't function. So I think we selectively unknow things. But it is out there, things like the Akashic records and things like that. It's all out there, and we can access it, but it's disappointing in that we can't all access it real easy. That's my starting model. So that's what I mean by the new God, and we're all part of it. We're all it. Never mind, part of it or sharing it. We're it. Our collective consciousness goes to make up that phenomenon that I'm calling God. And of course, it must be genderless. You'll follow from what I said. There's no matter, energy, space, and time. No matter means there's no gender. You can't have gender without organs and things and different parts of the human. So it's genderless. So So I even resist the female God idea. I mean, it was an interesting move to try and get away from this left brain masculine dude that's trying to control everything. But it's just as bad to go for women gender too. A God that doesn't have both sides, Mark, it's like a coin with only one side. It's not possible. It has to have two sides. And of course, the Chinese knew that all along. That's yin and yang. I'm sorry, I'm dribbling on. I'll give you a turn. Come on.
No, because you somebody with your background, you spent, first half of your life, I'm sure, if you're, an MD doctor, that's at least 7 to 9 years in education, right?
Right, yeah.
Learning, and so you have, and I'm not sure what kind of medical doctor you were, but I'm sure that you had been seeing birth, life, death, everything in between, especially being a medical doctor.
Yes.
And so that really kind of just challenges the mind, and I come back to, the mind itself, because Einstein, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he always equated the brain, which on average is about 3.5 pounds, right? Based on, research, but he always said it was one of the most complex organisms within our state of universe. And that's always kind of sat with me too. I mean, Einstein is fascinating, one of the many gurus that I've read about and followed in history. But, when you start thinking about the brain, and we've done past episodes from brain injury, neuroplasticity, working with psychedelics, expansion of consciousness, meditation. And so for you, was that an easy switch to really move from a medical background into what you do today? Because I'm sure with what you do, there also comes a lot of, pundits and critics and skeptics and naysayers and atheists that really kind of challenge that status quo, defining that, like you just said, that new God, but it's the new God of, I'm not sure how many different religions there are around the world, about 5,000 different religions around the world, all have a different God. But, just tell the listeners a little bit about that, because I think it's fascinating that you're a doctor and then you have this perspective and wrote this book as well.
May I say something absolutely, totally, stunningly shocking before I go on to answer your question? You don't need a brain. We are not a brain. There are hundreds of people, if not thousands or tens of thousands, walking around without a brain. Now you think, what? That's not possible, is your instinctive reaction. But a colleague of mine, a Dr. John Lorber, Professor Lorber as he was, in Sheffield, England, he's passed now, but he had a collection of hundreds of patients. He was a pediatrician and was sent lots of patients who had a condition called hydrocephalus. Now that means water on the brain, and the pressure builds up and it crushes the brain against the inside of the skull. And he had hundreds of patients that had this phenomenon. They were perfectly normal. Their memories were normal. Their emotions were normal, but they had less than 1% of the brain. It was just kind of a smear on the inside of the skull. Listen, one of these cases actually got a degree in accountancy. He was and had quite a high IQ. So we need to get rid of this idea that we are a brain. The brain is a kind of transducer mechanism. It tunes in to out there so that we know what's going on. And if we want to touch something, our brain will take care of that so we can reach over and touch an object. We learn about the universe that way. But you don't need a brain to think. Now, if you think I'm going too far, just one step further with me, Mark, which is out of bodies. Those experiences. I've had lots of them, and lots of people have had that, where they've been outside their body. You can see, you can hear everything. You don't need your eyes, you don't need your ears. You can be the other side of the building, down the corridor, and yet you still know what's going on, because you are directly sensing things directly without your sense organs. So I'm sorry that's horribly shocking and wrecks everything. Well, it doesn't wreck neuroplasticity and these things, but it's not nearly as important as getting a grasp on the fact we're not a brain anyway in the first place. Now, having said that, I forgot what you asked me. Can you remind me?
Just about.
Oh, yes, my experiences growing as a doctor. Yeah. Well, of course, you see death. You can be insensitive to it. I didn't find I was. I got very moved and I got very involved with the people I was seeing. And so I saw phenomena that I think other doctors didn't mostly see. I'm not saying they're useless, but I'm just saying I was especially tuned in. So when somebody passed, I could often see a sort of mist coming up out of the body. and going up, going up on high out of the building. Doctors wouldn't talk about this, but nurses did. You know this, Mark. Women are good at this, right? They're highly intuitive. In fact, I was called an honorary woman about 50 years ago because I'd be in the kitchen with the girls talking about past lives, telepathy, reincarnation. And the guys were in the other room talking about beer and cars and football. So I was more on the sort of feminine intuition side with that. And I've always loved that aspect of things. But for a doctor to not be sensitive and aware to the greater meaning of life, I think is a disservice. There is this pastoral role, as it's called, and often the church isn't playing that part, or it's just sort of dogma. It's just grinding out the cliches and the memes and the tropes and things. It doesn't really help much. But a doctor holding your hand in the sort of final step, or a nurse. Listen, the nurses were very good in the old days. They were nurses. Now they're sort of, exemplary doctors, really. They train how to do drips and kidney this and that. And they've forgotten their basic craft, which was comfort. And a nurse was a nursing or comforting person. And to die on your own in the wards without somebody like that, I think must be pretty horrific. It's better at home. But, I was aware of that. And I actually went much further sometimes. You might not approve, Mark. Many of the listeners might not. But sometimes when a person is ready to pass over, I'd hold their hand, and instead of fighting it, I would say, well, I had two questions. If I thought the person believed in reincarnation, I would say, what are you going to do in your next life? And the person would smile and start talking, even though they were completely zonked on Brompton's mix or something. If they were sort of very orthodox and formal, I would say, if you could live your life again, what would you do? And you can just see the person burst into smile. And so often, Mark, they passed that day or that night. They were just happy to move on then. I understand this and I believe in it. And I'm sad that so many doctors don't. I think you're just a piece of meat. And when you're done, you're gone. It's all over. Everything rots and you're gone. But, even advanced physics contradicts that, Mark. You leave something, we know that now, that's some kind of information or energy field message. That's probably what ghosts are all about, really. You must, and I used to have a great colleague at Salford University, that's Manchester in north of England, who used to say, advanced physics doesn't just say all this woo-woo stuff could happen. It said, it must happen by the laws of physics. You must leave a presence behind when you're gone. And he had wonderful pearls like that. He's gone, but I can pass these on now. And I'm the doyen or the elder person. These are my sayings now.
I love it, and thank you for sharing that wisdom with us. And I always say that physics always leaves the door cracked open, right? Because it's what we understand of physics today could be completely different 50 years from now, right? In our lifespan, in physics, I've always been fascinated. My background is also in medicine, emergency medicine, first responder, working with people pre-hospital, care. And seeing kind of the same things that you described, seeing when somebody, we're working on them and see the soul leave the body, see the energy or the etheric, if you want to call it that, many different definitions. Yeah. But it's always been, I've always asked my instructors over the course of the year when we learn about the heart, how the heart, the chambers, the aorta, how it, perfuses, but no one could ever explain where the energy comes from, that energy that creates the God spark within that makes that heart go. No teacher could ever say, well, we're not really sure. We just know that the spark is a source of energy that makes the heart go, that gives us our physical experience. Yeah. And we know by the source of physics today that energy always has to return to its source, or a part of it stays with its source before it returns. And so I've always found that very fascinating from a medical, from an anatomy and physiology standpoint. And, just with my own background before this in a previous life, before I did all this in the spiritual context, and even work with the brain, because my brother had passed. Before his passing, he had glioblastoma, and so he did a lot of brain research for a few years before his passing, and they actually did brain mapping, and it was quite a fascinating journey of how the brain operates and doesn't operate. When we're asleep, it's very active. When we're awake right now, it's very dormant. And they would talk about his memory and speech being right here, just on the left temporal of the brain. And I'd be like, well, how do you store that many memories, a lifetime? and they're not sure that you actually store, like kind of what you're saying, that the brain isn't the whole to everything. It might be more of just a conduit for consciousness, kind of like a uploading and downloading to a cloud source information. But I remember with his surgery, the surgeon, who was a surgeon from Duke, he would be awake for a surgery, and they put a ballpoint pen, literally just a ballpoint pen, right on his temple where the cancer was, and he'd be reading cue cards, monkey, giraffe, horse, zebra. And as soon as they pressed down on this part of the brain, nothing, just went completely, no speech, no cognitive response. And, so the surgeon would share that with me. And that's really kind of where I started getting interested about the brain. And your concepts too is like, we're not of the brain, but what would you define, before we go to our first commercial break, what would you say the brain is? Is it more of just a conduit for connection, or is it's something, but I'm not sure exactly what.
It's an in and out connector to connect us, the non-material spiritual being, non-material, so no matter, energy, space, or time, with the physical. We're not that good yet. We can think a thought, I will move the television over there, or I'll move a cup on my desk over. I'm working on it, but none of us are that good at it yet. So we have to just think the thought, and the brain will take your hand and push the coffee cup or the mug over there. That's what it's for. And in fact, in this day and age of cell phones, I often wave a cell phone around. You can talk to anywhere on planet Earth using a cell phone. You can speak to somebody in Brazil, as we were talking about, or Sydney, Australia, Tokyo, Japan. But that doesn't mean the person's in the phone. The person's over there. There are signals coming that your phone can pick up and interpret, and so that you can learn what's going on. You can have a conversation, but not by the person stepping into your phone and saying, "Hello, Keith." It's kind of a local model, isn't it, when you think what they really suppose is happening. But the truth is, is much simpler. And I don't know how much time we got just for the break, but you mentioned memory. It's interesting, that heart transplants and so on carries some memory. So an organ that's not a brain can carry a memory. And these are very exact memories. You must remember that one case where somebody was murdered and the donor got the heart. And then they started remembering the murder with enough detail that the police were able to get the guy. And he got jailed because the memories were accurate enough. They didn't transplant the brain, they transplanted the heart. So I think everything's up for grabs, don't you? I love it.
Yeah. And I love having these conversations, and people like yourself being on the show. So we're gonna cut to our first break. We're gonna be back here in just a few minutes, but we have our special guest today, Dr. Keith Scott-Mumby, with his new book, New World, or New God, New World. Stick around for the conversation. We got another half of the show to go. You are listening to Inspired Living. We'll be right back in just a few minutes.
Om Times TV. Billions of people walk this earth, yet there is only one you. Life offers endless connections, lessons, and moments of awakening. Are you ready to explore the beauty of this world, the healing energy that surrounds you, and your own soul adventure? Marc Lainhart, known as the Intuitive Prospector, is a trusted guide on that path. An internationally recognized psychic medium, medical intuitive, and spiritual advisor, Marc blends experience with heart-centered insight. From decorated veteran and first responder to teacher, minister, author, podcast host, and mentor, his journey has been one of service and discovery. His mission is simple: to help you awaken, heal, grow, and uncover the diamond within while discovering the hidden gems life has placed around you. Dare to explore. Dare to rise. Learn more at marclainhart.com and discover the Intuitive Prospector online.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
All right, welcome back to Inspired Living. Inspired listeners, we have our special guest today joining us for the first time, Dr. Keith Scott-Mumby, with his new book, New God, New World, Visions of the Divine That Will Reshape Our World. Keith, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm enjoying this, Mark. I really am.
Good. That's what we're all about. We want enjoyment. We want inspiration, motivation. So while you're holding up the book, tell us about why you chose the eye. Is it the all-seeing eye? Is it the third eye? Is it the human eye? Tell me about why you chose that for your cover.
I think it was more a deficit of other ideas than a brilliance. You know, what on earth could symbolize God of any sort, never mind a new God? And my designer, bless him, came up with this. He's a young boy in Romania. Well, he's not a young man now. He's been with me for 15 years. But he came up with this beautiful, and I believe he used AI to generate it, but doesn't it make an arresting cover?
Yeah,
and I just love it. So there wasn't the kind of deep philosophical thinking symbolism behind it that you're thinking, but it's gorgeous anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a wine label, right? I always ask my guests why the cover, why the story behind, because the cover is not the book, right? There's a lot of information within this book, and it's like a wine label. I always ask winemakers, like, why did you choose this label for your wine? Is because there's usually a story or some sort of connection. And the power of the eye to see another soul through the soul connection usually comes through the eyes. I just found it to be very cool. So
I think you've got it better than me then. That said it really nicely.
Well, and before the break, we were talking about moving things with our mind. And as you can see in the studio, I'm a big fan. I'm a child of Star Wars, Star Trek, and for your listeners out there, I guarantee at one point in your life, you tried to use the Force. You tried to move something with your mind at some point in your life. Everybody has tried to do this. But I do believe that there is a force that connects us all, together in different ways in the human, capacity. But one of the things I wanted to get to, because this next half hour is going to go so quick for us. But you talked about in your openings, one, why you wrote the book, but what would God be if humans had never invented religion, is the opening chapter. Various concerns addressed and how could our experience of God be improved. Let's start out there, because I think the listeners would really enjoy to hear that perspective.
Right. And it's crucial, really. We are saddled with this model of, somebody up there, typically a male person that's dumping on us down here. These are the rules. You've got to do this. This is the punishment if you don't toe the line. That's what's been laid on us. Now, I said I'd started from a different place, and you end up in a whole different universe, where it's all about joy and love and connection, really. I mean, religious people talk an awful lot about God and love, but you look around, and I'm sorry, I'm not seeing that. One of the problems, Mark, is what we call agency. Are you causing things? Are you not? And you get people who are, they survive the flood and they say, oh, God was with me. God helped me that day. And, thank God. But what about the other 500 people that got drowned? Did God have it in for them? That sort of agency model doesn't work. And I think we've got to let go of it, because it's difficult. If God is the creator, God makes everything, bad stuff happens, therefore God does bad stuff. You end up round in a logical loop that just doesn't work for me. So I think the importance of drawing a line between the two phenomena is really quite crucial. Otherwise, it leads people to believe they're beholden to this something outside of self, And let's face it, it's portrayed as a not really that friendly a presence. It's looking for trouble and, eavesdropping. I heard you say a bad word, you're going to hell if you're not careful. It's all tripe to me. I want joy, I want to see love, and I want to see excitement, and I want to see curiosity and adventure and religion. The way they put God forward is absolutely stifles curiosity, doesn't it? You're not allowed to ask questions. That's blasphemy. It's heresy. If you dare to answer the question wrongly, that's heresy. And a number of people have been put to death over the years because they said things that weren't approved. And not just in Christianity, there's happened with the Muslim Sufis as well. Some of them got very badly treated, like disemboweled and skinned alive and things for saying things that were not approved of.
Yeah.
What on earth kind of deity would put up with that behavior, even from its representatives and the priest classes? If God wanted to strike people, I think he should strike the priest and say, "You lot up it, you're not doing any good. Get out of here. I'll take over." But that's not going to happen anytime soon. But the thing is, the new God comes from a different direction. But here's the little logical side of this, Mark, which nobody actually spots unless I point it out. If I'm correct or anywhere near correct with the new God, what I'm calling the new God, it's not a new God. It's always been there from the beginning of time. It's the old God that's the illusion. Do you agree what I'm saying? That, it's the characteristics of the God I like to describe have always been there, and I believe in them. And that God is compassionate, caring, and loving and wise, but doesn't come and meddle in our affairs. If we choose a life on earth, you've got to take the rough and the smooth. You can't just say, well, the bad stuff, I just want to dump that. There is value even in the bad stuff if you're capable of learning and growing. I'm sure you know the metaphor. Was it St. John of the Cross, wasn't it? The dark night of the soul. If you have one of those, you'll be totally transformed spiritually into something bigger, more wonderful, beautiful. But it was hell getting there. I had dark night of the soul, and my first wife left, bless her. We're back friends again now, but it was heavy going. But it made me a better doctor, a better human being. I wouldn't have missed those dark years for anything. So you've got to take the good and the bad, and it's no good saying, "Oh, thank you God for the good stuff." And what do you say when he does bad stuff? If you can't say thank you God for that. Yeah. So that you're right to point that question out. It's an important distinction, in fact.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I always like to use the analogy of just exactly what you're saying, that the caterpillar doesn't become the butterfly without the cocoon, which is usually a deliquefying into a protein sack of goo. So what the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the butterfly through the transformations calls it a whole new perspective, or the butterfly thanks the caterpillar for the courage to go through, because it is that dark night of the soul. It is the transformation. And, and I go back to even when I really started questioning, as a once religious person who is now a spiritual person, we had in our family a series of events. Big part of the work I do today is because of what happened in my former life with the loss of my brothers and my father-in-law. And at that point, all happening in a very short period of time, there was that, well, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, God, why have you cursed or forsaken my family with murder and brain cancer and multiple sclerosis all in the same time? And we even saw it where people thought we were cursed, that people that were supposed to be there for you in your time of need would be like, whoa, we don't want really anything to do with what's going on with the Lainhart household, because they're losing people left and right. And we don't want any part of that. And it really I really started to question my religious upbringing and the religious dogmas and indoctrination and education that I had. And it really, kind of branched out to explore not just different religions, but look at Jesus from not a religious standpoint, but like a Christ consciousness, when he went into the temples and turned over the tables because of what they were doing back then, right? Learning about different scriptures, whether it's the Ethiopian scripture that has 20 more books than the current Christian Bible, which are edited books, by the way. So, really kind of suspect of, anything that's edited. Why is something edited and it's not authentic, it's not unique? And it's because it gives sometimes too much power or the divinity within that we all possess. And like you said, if I say that, some religion will be like, that's blasphemy. You're going straight to hell for saying that you have the God within. But even Jesus taught, he taught that and was misrepresented and misinterpreted. But how can God exist with the dogma and the sacred texts and the priestly gatekeepers that we're talking about? Because this has been going on for thousands of years, and we're not going to change this paradigm overnight. But there is more discussions as younger generations are very much awakened and not really kind of going down that same path. Religion has really dropped statistically worldwide, and I find that interesting as well.
I find it interesting, but I find it obvious, meaning, if you're a thinking person, how can you carry on with these old dogmas and paradigms that A, are manifestly not working, but B, don't make any logical sense? One of my chapters, as you know, is sort of unifying science and the divinity. If you can't unite the two, then I don't think you've got much to work with. I really hate it with these so-called new atheists. They're going around trumpeting that we prove that God doesn't exist. Science has got no place for God, and this is logical claptrap. You can't prove something doesn't exist. You can only fail to prove it does exist. But they haven't got any non-sensory God detectors or anything like that. So how the hell would they know? It's farcical to say that we have proof that, God isn't needed. And they view the universe as some big clanking machine where the only cause of anything is random chance. That's Darwinism, isn't it? Random chance will throw things this way and that, and therefore we get evolution. I'm not saying I'm against evolution, but, to put everything down to just random chance in a machine or like random number variables. And by the way, we can influence those. There's lots of good science from Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. He reached 5 sigma of proof that you can influence random number generators. But to say our universe just runs on chance is absurd. It's saying that there is no place for individuals and creativity. And, it's all predetermined by genes. Richard Dawkins is one of the extremely loud-mouthed new atheists. He thinks he's got a handle on everything. But he wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, where it's supposed that we're not even people, we're genes that create people so we can reproduce ourselves as some more genes further down the line. As if that were everything. Well, a whole shock came to his theory about 10, 12 years ago when they discovered that animals, it started with yeasts, but plants and animals and fungi can actually create their own genes on the job. Here's a new medium. I can't feed on this. I'll need an XYZ enzyme to do that. So I know I'll do a gene that creates this enzyme. And within a couple of hours, they've got the enzyme. They can now digest the food they're in, and off they go happy. So the idea that genes are some immutable thing that's handed down from on high is ridiculous. You make your own as you go. And if you don't like the ones you've got, fix them. Go for something else. So the predeterminism factor has got no place in my model of the new God, and neither has the outside interference model. We're driving a machine, I think, not a vehicle. We're driving a vehicle through this wonderland forest that's called the universe. Well, there's probably lots of universes, and there's probably lots of dimensions. It multiplies on and on till you get dizzy.
Yeah. We may lose some of our listeners and audience base if we go into the 3-dimensional to the 4th dimensional, the 5th dimensional construct of multi-dimension. But it goes back to, Hawkins always talked about, he was always curious about, it's almost like our universe has been set up specifically for us as humans, and even in this day and age with, the latest Artemis project that just left the Earth, there's still people that think the Earth is flat, right? There's that concept that the Earth is flat, but you look at the universe around you and everything is round. It would be very awkward if here's just the 3rd planet from the sun and it's very flat and everything else is round. And then, there's proof that they're out there shooting back from the moon, just a great coming together moment for humanity. But one of the things I want to ask you, based on space exploration and kind of the current times of where we're at and kind of your thought, because one of the answers I heard from, the disclosure of, are we alone in the universe? One of the biggest questions of mankind is, are we alone, whether in the universe, the Fermi paradox, or here on the planet? And a lot of the feedback I get is they don't want to answer it because of religion. because it would upset the status quo of religions around the world to say, wait, well, humans aren't the alpha that we once thought we were. But there's so much information that's coming out publicly. And I've long said in our roaring 20s of this decade that we would learn that we're not alone, which is for me, it's an evolution point of consciousness to kind of look at the bigger picture of the universe like you're talking about, if we're just talking three-dimensional construct. But what's your thought on, because that information is coming out, the drip, 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 but it's coming out very, very crowdsourced from multiple locations around the planet. And it's one of the longest running questions and conspiracy theories of mankind. Are we alone in the universe? And how does God equate into other beings that are not human?
Right. Well, let me start with a well-known joke. I hope you've heard it, which is the best proof of intelligent life in the universe is that they stay away from us.
Yeah,
which I think is quite hilarious. That'll satisfy me as a proof. Anyway, in my writings, not this particular book, but in my writings, I've featured consciousness appearing in machines and things. But you know the movie Avatar, where the idea was that the person's conscious awareness would pass over into the avatar. It's been done. It's actually not a movie, Mark. It's arrived. And it started with a very simple experiment that was done in Israel, sending data to a university in Béziers in the south of France. And they had a guy wired up so that they could interpret his thought. After enough practice, they realized, right, that array of neurons firing means he wants to lift his right arm. And that array of neurons firing means lift his left arm. And this kid, I forgot his name, but, he's a young man. He got very good anyway. And so they hitched him up to this robot in the south of France. He could see what the robot was seeing. It was only a little thing, like yay big and clanking about almost like a toy. But he could do movements. He could go and find things in the room. They would say things like, there's a red ball in this room somewhere. Go and see if you can find it. And he'd wander around till he found it. But the most amazing thing in the report was that he fell over and somebody went to pick him up. And he shouted, he was in Israel, remember, the robot was in France. When they picked him up, he shouted, "Leave me alone, get your hands off me." Just in that short space of the experiment, he'd become virtually embodied in this robot figure. He felt it was him. And it was like somebody grabbing him. That was one of the most profound spiritual moments in the last 20 years for me, when you think what the implications are. Because, we worry about, water-based life and, where a planet's suitable. But if you can inhabit a machine or a robot, you could go anywhere. You could go into the heart of a star. You could dive down a black hole. I don't know that we'd ever come back, but, things where life could not possibly exist. No, but maybe some mechanical structure could, and you can embody it. I just, I let myself go in the writings then and started imagining, we'd line up and buy some tickets down here on Earth in the theater, and you'd go for a walk on the moon. That's what you did. You had all the sensory perceptions of walking on the moon. I mean, it's just got nearer and nearer, hasn't it? Virtual reality is now. It's upon us, basically. But think what that means for life and consciousness and the inspiration of that, Mark. Of course, there's life in the universe. Come on, you're a radical enough program. I know, the kind of people that you share with. I can remember thousands of past lives. As clear as, breakfast today. I can't remember them all, and I can't remember all of any of them, but I can remember parts of thousands of them. But I'm among a group of people that spent some time around Arcturus. We Arcturians. There are Pleiadians. You probably heard these and think, oh, yeah. These people are a bit loopy. No, they're not. They remember being there. I can quite distinctly remember. I can remember the name of the spaceship that I had around Arcturus. And if you think, all right, the doctor's lost it, let's close him down early. Let me point out the Dogons, which you may know of. The Sirius mystery. The Dogons were an African tribe living in Mali, and they lived in mud huts. They couldn't be more. They didn't know what a phone or a computer, certainly not what a telescope was. But they worshipped a small white dwarf that was a companion to the star Sirius. Now, Sirius is the fourth brightest object in our sky. It's the sun, the moon, Venus, and then Sirius. It's very intense and bright. They had a whole ritual of worshipping this white dwarf, companion to Sirius. The only trouble is there wasn't a white dwarf companion to Sirius until the 1930s, when astronomers discovered it. And exactly as they said, it's going around Sirius. This is a little tiny white dwarf star. How did people living in mud huts know it was there? Easy peasy. They remembered it from when they were up there. They're now down on Earth, but they worshipped Sirius and this star, the other star. I mean, listen, there's shed loads of proof of other incarnations, life in other places. So, why not other worlds, other dimensions? I don't know if you mentioned, I think, well, you hinted at string theory, 10-dimensional string theory. And that predicts, at the very least, mathematically, they worked out, it predicts, at the very least, 10 to the power 500 universes, right? That's 10, followed by 500 zeros, universes. And a guy called Alexander Villenkins I think he was at Tufts, speculated and said, I really get scared of the idea there might well be another Alexander Vilenkin out there right now writing this piece exactly as I am. But unfortunately, I think it's very likely to be true. So what do you think of that? I mean, that puts a whole different perspective on creativity, doesn't it? I mean, every universe could have another planet Earth and all the other conditions anyway. So that'd be it's not 500 universes, it's one followed by 500 noughts universes, which is billions, trillions, skrillions of gazillions of unbelievable numbers of universes. Out there somewhere, Mark, there's got to be a doppelganger for you and one for me. It'd be nice to meet them one day, I guess. But and what part of my position, Mark, is that we ought to be able to know this, and go out there and get the information. We can't. We've been so educated out of it that it's just beyond the ordinary person to do this. And isn't it sad? Yes, there are individuals with outstanding abilities, but what a psych, like Edgar Cayce, what he can do, I should be able to do. Why does he get it and I didn't get it? I'm not being mean or jealous, but it troubles me philosophically that we can't all seem to access these abilities, and I don't know why, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, and that's the goal, working on it, right? Just one day at a time, and really challenge yourself through body, mind, and spirit, right? All three concepts of who we are. And it's you talked about Avatar, and it's long. One of my questions of this reality is, does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? When something is, Gene Roddenberry would write was science fiction back in the 60s is now science fact today, and we don't look at it differently, and that's why I do this show, because it's really, we could spend hours, Keith, talking about this, the concepts of different states of consciousness and God and religion and spirituality. And, I don't have an hour to do this, but that's why I do the show, is to offer this platform for perspective and get people to think outside the box. And, for some people that's great. For other people, it's very, very scary. And, that paradigm shift is not easy. But again, like what the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the butterfly calls a whole new beginning. So just with the last few minutes we have here of the show, what would you like to share to the listeners about this book and where folks can get the book and learn more about you?
Oh, yes, of course. I should say that. Yes, its title is New God, New World. If you look under my name there on the video graphic, newgodnewworld.com is the website. You go there, you can find some audios and videos, but there's a big, right at the top of the page, buy it. So you can go and get yourself a copy that way. But I don't mind if you go to Amazon. They don't pay me as much money, but I don't care. If you go to Amazon, there's already 100 brilliant reviews, 5-star reviews. In fact, there's only one person. He said this is a crazy book and gave me 1 star. Clearly, some kind of religious fanatic that wanted to hurt me. Everybody else gave me a full-on 5-star. But you can get it from them. There's the digital copy. That's $10. A paperback like this one, which is $20, 19 something. And you can actually get a hardback, because I do think it's the kind of book that people might want to treasure, and have a hardback that will last on your shelves for some time. You can also, if you go to New God, New World, join in with us. You can sign up to. I came up with this concept years ago. You probably laugh, Mark, but I called it Scriptures in the Making. I'm not being conceited. I mean, I didn't say holy or anything, just scriptures. And scripture, the word just means writing, doesn't it? You know, like script or manuscript and so on. It only means that. So scriptures in the making. And I've now built several thousand people now in my new scriptures colony. So any of your listeners want to go and join us, that we do some regular meetings, and they can get a whole slew of emails that have put all sorts of fascinating ideas in front of them along the lines of what we've been talking. So I want to start a movement, actually. I think I'm going to found a non-profit foundation, you know, a New God, New World Foundation. Why don't I do that, Mark? I think it's probably time. It'll take me a few centuries to overtake the Catholic Church. They're pretty big, but they're coming off the rails gradually. Their story's getting slimmer and slimmer in the face of modern science. Whereas, you know, the New God model, it's predicted almost by science. I mean, like I said, the starting place is just logic. If that, then that, then that. And then you must end up with what we've got, which is a wonderful interconnected society of people. We're all one. We don't all think alike, but if we're, I mean, the whole message is love and compassion, really. Never mind being right and, you know, behaving and the rules and morals and all that stuff. Forget all that crap. It's just about being decent human beings. And I even dared to suggest what I thought a decent human being might be in one of the final chapters. In the old days, it was a big warrior with a sword that could defend your tribe. And then in the Middle Ages, it was a knight errant that was gallant and would rescue the ladies and behave chivalrously. Probably in the 20th century, it was some smart out. And then now, lately, we got sort of geeks and nerdy people who are probably they consider themselves the optimum human beings. Yeah. But, you know, the religious optimum was always somebody who was so self-sacrificing to the point of virtual self-destruction. We don't want that, of course. Yeah, right. Okay, if I talk myself out.
Yeah, well, Dr. Keith Scott-Mumby, newgod.newworld.com. Thank you for being our guest today on Inspired Living. You write another book. Come on, share that. You got a platform to share.
One more time. I've got to say, wait a minute. The camera is going. I'm putting it the way I think is right to get it in the middle, and it goes off the screen.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
There you go. It's like trying to ride a bicycle where you turn the handlebars one way and the wheel actually goes the wrong way. You can't ride bicycles like that. Anyway, what was I going to say? Oh, yes, I've enjoyed it hugely, Mark. You've been a wonderful interviewer. And you gave me my rein, I must admit. Once you wind me up and start me, I don't stop easy.
Yeah. All right, listeners, until our next soul adventure together, be kind, be caring, be compassionate. Most importantly, wherever you're out in this world, dare to dream, dare to explore, dare to live, discover the diamond within and the many hidden gems all around. And we'll see you next time here on Inspired Living. And thank you, Dr. Keith Scott-Mumby. newgodnewworld.com. Get the book, check it out, and we'll see you next time. Namaste, namago. Take care, buddy.